Hello everybody and welcome to another Unity game development video. In today's video I'll be going over some changes I've made in my Unity 3D platformer Brainine. Mostly what I've been working on lately is NPC interaction. So basically quest giver type things like how you'd see in I believe Mario Odyssey does something like this, and there's like Tony Hawk Pro Skater games where you go up to a random NPC that's standing around and they kind of give you an objective in the surrounding area. I haven't quite gotten to the section where they would activate a quest or give you some kind of objective, but the general interaction of talking to them and going through the text, displaying it on the screen, and reading that from a text file, all of that I got down. So I'm just going to press play and demonstrate it, and then I'll talk about it immediately after. So right now I'm walking around. Here's the NPC. If I'm back here and I hit the interaction key, which in this instance I've set it to T. If I press that, it's not going to do anything. But when I'm in range of the NPC and I press the key, it'll enter the interaction. So it switches cameras, displays text, and then it sets it up for the next interaction. So I could put this on a timer where if we sit here for long enough it could switch to the next scene, but right now I have it just still set to that T key. So the initial interaction key is also the skip text key or next line key. So I'm going to press it again. It's going to switch the text. I'm going to press it again. In this instance, switch the text and switch camera again. And then we've accepted the quest or whatever and exits. And I could go back there and it could start all over again. And if I go into it and I'm kind of halfway through it and I want to exit, I could just hold the skip key and it'll exit the interaction altogether. So if I stop this now and I look over at the NPC, if I get off of this 2D mode and focus on the NPC, let us go into the inspector and see a little bit of what's going on here just by looking at the variables. Here's the NPC controller. The interaction distance, I forgot a C there, so it's an iteration distance, but that's fine. I could always just change that. It's set to 4 units, so when the distance between the player and the NPC is less than 4 units, then you'll be able to enter that interaction. I was going to say it hasn't yet been set to discern between NPCs and enter specific interactions based on the distance of the player and the character, specifically between a specific NPC, but that is how it works because the script, this NPC controller, is actually linked to this character, and in the script that's getting the interaction distance, it is actually detecting the distance between the player and the transform of this specific game object. So it won't interact with any other quests given by any other characters, specifically doing it by proximity of the character with the script attached. So I guess there could be some conflict there if you were technically in range of multiple NPCs at once, but that seems unlikely and very easily avoidable if you just go out of your way to place the characters at a certain distance from each other. Or I guess it could prioritize whichever one you interact with first, kind of canceling out the ability to interact with other NPCs as long as you're within that range. And next what we have is an array of cameras. Right now these cameras are being manually inputted into this array, so I've just dragged them in there. The very first camera in the array is the main camera attached to the player. I might just have it automatically grab that first camera and have the others be manually placed. But for now, what happens is I drag these cameras in there, and we have one right here. That's the main camera attached to the player. And then we have a second camera, and that's the one looking at the NPC. And then we have camera 1, which I believe is an overview one right here. And that's just to show kind of the nature of this particular script and how you can do storytelling with that. You could potentially have it pan over a certain area with like objectives like how they do in Tony Hawk. And if we zoom back in on the NPC and we go down here, this camera array is actually manually set, the size of it. So right now it's set to 3. I could change it to 4 and then drag another camera in there. None of that is controlled in the actual script. That's all just manual tinkering with the arrays. Here's a skip line key. I just have that set here with a variable so I could change it if I needed to. Locked in, I'll explain that when we get to it in the code. File name, NPC test. That's the name of a text document that is currently being stored in the resources folder within the project. So I'll show you in a bit. That's where I type out everything that's going to appear and control the NPC interaction. Text background, that's just the kind of shape is being placed behind the text. When the game starts running, that gets disabled, and then it gets re-enabled as soon as the interaction starts. I'll probably change that to a small array or a non-specific sized array so that we can just add elements to that if for some reason we needed more UI elements. And then I could just have a small loop run through that and disable or enable those. Skip timer, that's just a little timer with that connects this cooldown here so that you can't just constantly spam the key and skip everything. It takes about 0.4 seconds before you could skip the next piece of dialogue. And that really isn't that long. So if I go in here and I just rapidly press the T key, you'll see how fast you could skip everything. And the hold skip timer counts up using time to delta time, and it counts to the hold skip time requirement. And basically that's just how long do you have to hold this key to skip the entire interaction. So now if I jump into the code, we can see that the script controlling this is about, it's roughly 200 lines. I could condense some of this, but it's not that bad. Especially these variables. I just have a lot of unnecessary spaces between that, and that doesn't really affect performance or anything. Don't let anybody tell you that your code should be judged on how many lines you have in it. If it works, it works. If it's not, if there's no payoff or trade-off with the performance or readability of it, then it doesn't really matter. If somebody says that your code sucks because it's too long, well, just ignore them because they're idiots. So we can go down, and here are some private variables that I can get to now. So this is a string called trigger speak. It's parentheses SPE, event is EVE, camera is CAM, animation is ANI, and ending trigger is END. And you can see here that the text and the background behind it are both disabled at start, but also they're these lines, these array of strings up here is loading resources.load NPC test as an asset. So it's going into the resources folder, it's finding the NPC test, what is it called, text document, and it's loading it as a text asset. And then it's splitting that every single time there's a new line. That's what that /n means. And it's grabbing every line from that document and making it its own element in the array. So I switch over here to NPC test, cam1 SPE hello. That is its own line in the array. This is its own line in the array. This is its own line, so on and so forth. So every single one of these lines is an element in the array. If we go to the controller again, if we switch to here, there is a function, a coroutine that says read from lines. And that has been called with text key input. So if I go down to text key input, it's right here. So if the key, skip line key, is being pressed, and the character is close enough, that distance right there, which is taking the vector 3.distance between the transform of the player, the transform of the NPC and the player. And the player's position is just being grabbed by a static variable that's on the player itself. So I have a player information component attached to that player, and it's literally just returning the game object of the player, and I'm getting the transform of that. So we're getting the distance between those. If the distance is less or equal to the interaction distance, then we can interact with the player when we press the skip line key. If the character is locked in, so if the character is locked into this interaction every time we press that skip line key, it's going to go to the next line. So current line is adding on to that current line, and we're going to the next line, and I'll explain a little bit in a second. If I go to current line right here, if I find that, I'll show you every instance of it. If we go up, that's essentially just an integer that we're using to iterate through the string array that is the lines. So the current line is 0, we're on the very first string. We go current line 1, so it's been added on, iterated when we do that input. So we go to string 1 in the array, so that's the second element in the array. String 2 or current line 2, and we're going to the third element in the array, and so on and so forth until we reach the end of the array and we finish the interaction. And we're only going to iterate on that current line if the current line is less than the length of the array. So we don't want to keep adding stuff on if we're already outside of the array. And skip timer has to be less or equal to 0. So that's basically just the timer to make sure that you can't spam it too quickly. So it's not going to let that, you can still make the input, but it's not going to have any effect unless that skip timer is less or equal to 0. If we're not locked into the interaction, then it's going to start the interaction. The coroutine is going to start, and it's going to do that read lines coroutine. And the skip timer cooldown is going to reset, just like if we were locked into the interaction. Okay, now we have our coroutine read from lines. So that locked in variable right there, that bool, is now set to true. So that basically just makes it so that this input has a dual purpose. It brings us into the interaction, and it has a separate purpose while we're in the interaction. So a locked in variable is set to false at the very beginning. We enter the interaction, it is set to true. So it no longer uses this code, and it goes to the next part, and it'll reserve this code. It will use this code while we're in the interaction, and it will no longer use this code, and it will save that for when we are no longer in the interaction if we want to re-enter it. So we're now in the interaction. We're reading from the lines. Player movement control is set to false, so that's a separate component on the player. The player can no longer use input to move while the interaction is happening. Lock this line index is set to false. That is a bool locally within the coroutine, and that's basically all it's doing is it's saving the index of the current line in the lines array, so that it won't update later. So it'll say if this line index is not locked, this line index equals current line, and then the index is locked. So it's going to set it to that current line, and then it's not going to update until we go through this do while function. The text and the background are enabled so that we'll be able to see what the character is saying when we finally do read those lines. And we're entering this do while statement here, and it's a really long one. So we're doing all of this while current line is less than lines.length. So while there's still lines to be read, we're gonna go through this and read them. So here, if hold skip timer, if we're getting the skip key still, then we're gonna add on to hold skip timer by time.delta time, and that's going to lead to skipping the interaction later. So we're gonna hold that skip timer, and then it'll eventually reach a certain threshold, and it'll skip the interaction. I'll go to that now. Where is it? Yeah, if hold skip timer is greater or equal to hold skip time requirement, current line equals lines.length. So we reach the end of the interaction immediately. So if this line index equals the current line, which we just set, the line index is equal to the current line, then we're going to run through the code that evaluates the text document, or evaluates each line of the text document until we iterate on that element, the current line, and we add on to it. Once we go through all of this, it'll realize that the current line has been iterated upon, and this line index will be set to that value at that point. And then we'll switch back and we'll go to the next line in the document. So if we go down, it's going through, and there's a lot of things it's going to check for. It's checking if it contains the trigger camera, trigger event, animation, speak, and end. And those are those strings that I showed you earlier. So it's checking if it finds these substrings within that string. And It usually will if you are trying to achieve that specific effect. So if I'm trying to have the character talk, it's going to find the trigger speak substring. If I want to end the interaction at the end, you'll have the trigger end substring with this parentheses END, and so on and so forth. So if we go in here and we're evaluating the line, it'll check for that trigger camera thing, that parentheses CAM. What it's going to do is it's going to find that CAM. It's going to go to the index of the letter C in that, because each of those particular triggers have one specific letter that is unique to it. C does not appear in any of these other triggers, and it is going to go forward 4 indexes and grab the character immediately after that 4th added index. It's going to grab that value right there. It's going to convert it to an integer, and that is going to be the cam command index. So what's happening there is, if I go into the NPC test, if it finds camera, CAM, in this parentheses, it's going to find what is immediately after the parentheses in there, which is a character of 1, and it's going to convert that to an integer, and that's the value it's going to use to decide which camera to switch to. And it's taking that and it's feeding it into the change camera function. So if we go down to void change camera, we're basically going through the cameras array, and we're finding the index that matches that cam index that we just gotten from the text. So we'll go in there, it'll be cam1. 1 will go through that function as this integer cam index, and that cam index will be fed into the function. So if I equals 1, then that is the camera that's going to be enabled. All other cameras in the array are going to be disabled. And then the next couple blocks in the function would act more or less the same way. They're not set up yet, but they are grabbing the correct index in that substring to get a value or an integer from that to be potentially used in a function like this change camera one. And that function will probably work the same way as the change camera function. It'll just change the animation based on an array that is set up manually in the inspector, and then it'll find that animation and play it. Same with this event, that is just in place for kind of triggering characters or other things in the environment to do something. Probably in conjunction with a camera will look at something like a bridge or something. If that bridge needs to collapse, it'll change the camera view, and then that event will happen after that. The next block of code in the function is a little different. It's pretty much there for displaying the text. We don't need this print function here. That was just for debugging. But what is happening is it's creating a string called line. It's going into the lines array, finding the current line that we're on, and it's removing everything between and including the regular brackets right here. So if we go to the text document, any of these kind of command or trigger kind of text, like this cam, speech, or animation, event type stuff, it's finding everything in there, and it's getting rid of those before it kind of displays this text. So when it says hello, we don't want it to say cam1 SBE hello. We just want it to say hello. So it's going to get rid of all of this before it displays the text, and that's basically all it's doing. And if it contains the trigger end, which is parentheses END, then current line equals lines.length, which just brings our current line to the end index of the lines array, and that just ends the interaction. Here's that hold skip timer again. You just hold the key and it ends the interaction by itself. It brings it to current lines to lines.length. If the key goes up, so if you release the skip line key, then the hold skip timer goes back to 0. So it's counting up with time.delta time till it reaches the requirement, and it's going to reset that timer so it has to count up again if you let go, so you don't accidentally end up skipping the entire interaction. This little section of code is just checking or running the skip timer function. So if skip timer is greater than 0, then it's being subtracted by time.delta time. If it's not, if it's less than 0, then it equals 0, because we don't want it to go into the negatives. And that's just being run while the current line is equal to the this line index. And this part is important here because this yield return null. So what that's doing is it's waiting for you to increment the current line so that it equals the does no longer equals this line index. Then it will skip to the next section in the array. So basically it's going to wait right here and wait until we get to that next index. So you can read the text, or you can skip, or you can stand up and go away from the computer for a second. Basically how any game works, you need to somewhat interact with the text or skip it in some way, unless we add some kind of timer that automatically skips it after a certain amount of time. So it's waiting here, it's yielding that result, and you can read the text. Once that's over, the this line index lock is set to false, so we can redo it. And if there is another line in the array after we increment, then it's going to go all the way back to the top and do it again. Hold skip timer is set to 0 because that is a global variable. And the text is disabled, background is disabled, lock in is false, and the controls are given back to the player. And the camera is set to the first index, which should be the player camera. And that's pretty much it. And if we go back into the game, I could demonstrate it again. And those other functions that haven't been applied yet, like the event and animation one, will be super simple. Just do exactly what was done with the camera, and you basically have yourself a perfect NPC interaction setup right there. You can add different speech options in there, like options for the player to respond, and those could relate to different line indexes in the text document. So let's say I got to halfway through the text document and it says, how do you feel about that? And you have one option or another, and based on what you choose, the character will say something different. So we have separate blocks of lines within the text document where if you said like, well, I don't know if we should do that, it'll skip forward to a specific index that starts a different chain of lines further ahead. And if you respond a different way, it'll skip to a different section of the array. So we have different lines that could result in that, and we can even put in custom code, or not even custom code, but we could add more kind of trigger elements to the code. So I could even add a specific response thing, or even just the event function that is already built into what I have here. If somebody said, halt, you violated the law, pay the court a sentence, or pay the court a fine, or serve your sentence, or whatever, and you said pay fine, sure, we could put an event that would just say send character to the jail. Or we could put an event, you could say fuck you, I'm gonna kill you. We could put another event that just says aggro the player or start fighting. So it's a very modular system, and it's all controlled with a text document, and that's what makes it so easy to interact with. I hope you found this video to be useful and interesting. I'm going to go back in and demonstrate it one more time. You walk up to the player, and so we could just go through it, pressing T every time I want to switch to the next thing, and it resets again, and it just works again. And this is very specific to this NPC. If I added this code to a different character, just off to the left or something, and I just gave them a different text document to reference, entirely different scenario would play out. So I think it's a very interesting and modular system. I didn't check any tutorials for this, except for how to access a text document that is saved on the Unity resources folder. That's about it. I didn't look up how to like interpret it or use it, anything like that. And I think that it's pretty straightforward, and hopefully you can think of your own ways to use something like this. And the main purpose of something like this is that you definitely don't want to hard code text, so much text and response and dialogue into every single character. You can just make a new text document that's stored in the project, and that is what is interpreted for the function. And I think that's very useful. So if you like this, please like, subscribe, share the video around, share it to people who might find it useful, and follow me on here. Subscribe, whatever I just said that. Follow me on Twitter. I have a Twitter of the same name. It's at lowresdev with underscores between the words. And you can follow me on my personal Twitter, cyberbully20xx. And I am the creator of Energy Sword Sunday. So if you like Halo, follow me on there. It's the official underscore ESS. So thank you. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Reddit and stuff like that. So if you see this from Reddit, go follow my YouTube. Go follow my Twitter. Thank you. Have a nice day.